Hello and welcome to my discussion on post-secondary education in the United States. My name is Matt Muncy, a student at Quinnipiac University working towards a master's degree in business analytics. With this slide, what I'd like to do is discuss the different types of institutions. What we have here are really three different types of institutions. And when I talk about institutions, that really is just meaning colleges and universities throughout the United States. Highlighted by green, we have the public institutions, so those institutions that receive public funding. And then in the orange, we have private nonprofit institutions. So that would be what we would think of as traditional private colleges and universities in the United States. So those that are not sort of their main goal is generating profit. On the blue here, we have the private for-profit institutions, and this you can certainly see is a large percentage, at least in most states, of the total number of institutions that are available for students to attend. A lot of these schools, the private for-profit institutions, may be offering degrees in massage therapy, welding, different things of that nature that you could see that's more prevalent, with their predominant degree being maybe a certificate degree, and then as opposed to an associate's or a bachelor's degree. Over on this slide, what we have is the number of undergraduate students who are attending college or university in each individual state. The larger states, so the larger pie charts here just indicates the larger size of the number of undergraduate students attending schools in that particular state. So what we have here, you've got the public institutions, highlighted by green once again, orange with nonprofit private schools, and then blue with for-profit private schools there. You can see that even though the large number of institutions were in the state of California that were private for-profit type, there's not that many students in comparison to that. What we have here is going to be just a simple comparison map of what we have, the number of institutions being on the left-hand side, so that just pure base number of institutions that are in each particular state. And then over on the right-hand side, we have just a number of undergraduate students per state. So you can certainly see, as I was mentioning just a moment ago, the state of California having 383 private for-profit institutions, but only 207,000 students attending those institutions. You can see in Texas it's very similar. You've got a very large number of private for-profit schools, but most of the students in that state are attending public colleges and universities. Over on this next slide, what I've been able to do is really separate out acceptance, retention, and completion rates, and then compare those to the number of institutions and also the number of undergraduate students at those institutions. So what I've been able to do, even though the acceptance rate is not 100% relevant here, to what we would consider the retention rate and then also the completion rate, but it's about the closest thing we can get to compare to there. What I'd like to do, you're able to see the private for-profit institutions. You have a higher acceptance rate overall, and then you have a lower retention rate. So only about 50% of those students who are enrolled at the particular private for-profit institutions are actually being retained to that second year. And then just about a third, about 35% across the board of those private for-profit students are actually completing that degree program. So you get about 2/3 of those students who will begin that program but never end up completing that, which is pretty tough to see there. And then comparing that along the lines of private, nonprofit, and then public, you can see overall that you have a pretty close ratio there, and some similarities up here, and then not much different. Though you do have a lower number, 45% to 53% of the number of students who are completing those degree programs at said institutions. Over here on the right-hand side, I've been able to give us a little bit of sort of ability within our presentation here to go through and select individual states and see how those numbers would change and alter by state. I'm from Virginia, so I'm going to focus for most of this just on the Virginia states here, but you can certainly see A little bit of change there from the whole. You do have public institutions. You have 163 undergraduate students. Their acceptance rate across the board is about 2/3. Retention rate is really good at the Virginia public school level, about 83%, and then the completion rate is about 65%. So remembering that number across the whole of about 50%, you certainly feel like the state of Virginia is doing pretty well there with the number of institutions and looking at bachelor's degrees here. You can also see that adjust a little bit when you just compare the bachelor's degree students, or those predominant degrees being bachelor's degrees. Over on the next slide, looking at family income, cost of attendance, and graduate debt. You really wanted to check out here, private nonprofit institutions, and then kind of how they track through on these each individual little pieces here. So, those that are looking at bachelor's degrees for, private nonprofit institutions, those usually cost a little bit higher than your public institutions. So you can see that the, family income would be higher for those nonprofit private schools as opposed to just public schools as well. Going through with cost of attendance, private nonprofit schools cost more than do public and for-profit. And then graduate debt is also, higher, slightly higher than public schools, but also would like to note that even though the, the cost of attendance at that private for-profit school is a little bit less than your, sort of private nonprofit school, you do have traditionally more graduate debt on average, which is pretty, tough to see with those types of programs. One sort of calculated field that I was able to put in here, and I think has some relevance, is the ratio of debt to cost. So once again, we can go through and see, cost of attendance here at the private nonprofit school. You got a higher cost of attendance, 24,000 roughly for the graduate debt. Sort of the debt to cost ratio is considerably less, about half less than is that ratio at the private for-profit. So that's definitely something to consider there. What I've been able to do is, on this next to last slide, is to create sort of a sortable map in a sense, and also looking at the 10-year income. So the data that I was able to pull through the really college scorecard is what it's called. With that data set, looked at about 7,000 colleges and universities across the United States. And a lot of those had data on what a student possibly could be making, or sort of the average income of a student after 10 years of their start date. So not after a graduation date, but really after a start date there. And in here, we're able to see, some of the higher institutions, of the SUNY Downstate Medical Center. 10-year income afterwards is $162,000. Other ones that are of note, Georgetown University here has a 10-year possible income of, $110,000 is that average income. And then here I've been able to add in a fair number of other sort of measurables. So the cost of attendance on average, the acceptance rate, you can see there at Georgetown is fairly low at about 17%. But once those students enroll, about 92.5% of those students will complete their degree there, which is really neat to see. And then in the adjustables here, I've been able to sort of allow some more flexibility with looking. Once again, being from Virginia, I'd like to take up a sortable there and to look at the 10-year income by institution. And one of the ones that I'd like to take a look at here is Washington and Lee. Certainly a pretty heavy cost of attendance at about $56,000 a year, but the 10-year income on average is just under $90,000 a year. So students from that institution seem to be doing quite well there. Over here on the last slide, what I'd like to do is take a look at another ratio that I was able to calculate here that I think really revolves around and probably is a pretty good indicator of what I would classify as a best value type of institution. I know U.S. News and World Report and Princeton Review oftentimes go through and create their best value institutions. And within this presentation, I'd like to consider best value to be the amount of debt that a student has, and then looking at their 10-year income. So these, being sort of low value types of schools, would be, a high debt to 10-year income ratio. We can see here, once again, I'd like to take a look at the state of Virginia, and then taking a look here with the ascending. So, one interesting part to note, looking at Washington and Lee University that we discussed earlier, scroll all the way down here to the bottom, and you're going to see Washington and Lee University is down here. So traditionally, that average debt that a student would have is going to be quite low compared to their 10-year income there. One particular thing to note, and really, a driving point in this research with this presentation, is taking a look at the large amount and large ratio of debt to 10-year income that really is amassed by these private for-profit institutions here, highlighted by blue. You can see so many of them, look to have a 1.0 or 1.1 debt to 10-year income ratio, and that's pretty tough to amass and really to see. Oftentimes when we discuss with particular high school students their possible futures there, you're looking at what sort of value are you getting out of those institutions, and what can you expect to earn, and then what sort of debt might you have as well. So you can see that the private for-profit institutions certainly have a tougher case to be made amongst their admissions offices and amongst their publications of why a student should attend versus another possibly institution that would be able to go through and say, hey, we're not having that much debt to your possible 10-year income down the line. So I hope you've enjoyed my presentation. There are a lot of neat functionalities that were able to be built in here, and separating out just schools that had the predominant degree of a bachelor's program or an associate's degree. So I hope you'll take a look around there. Thanks again.